I would say this one here, Ishin. Yes, or maybe. It's definitely a possibility. Despite some ideas about it being dated, it really is like no more dated than something like that recent Fist of the North Star game the studio put out. Tech isn't up with their Dragon Engine games, but it's still no different than, say, Zero, really. In fact, this introduced a lot of the stuff you'll see in Zero and a bunch of ideas you won't. For example, the style system is pretty much here. The ability to run by holding down X. Stuff like, you know, trading in CP points for like smaller upgrades. All that stuff. A lot of Zero is in this one, like for example, switching to your different styles. Can I switch them all? Okay. Okay, that's just gonna load. And it's with gun sword. So this one, I don't see why it couldn't. But Black Panther 1 and 2, that's definitely a no. I think just because of the tech. I mean, it's a shame. I think they're decent games, but I don't think they come out just because they're PSP games, even if they look better than a lot of PSP games. They're still PSP games. But then the big one is Kenzan. Now, Kenzan is... of the ones I've beaten, it's basically Kenzan and the first Black Panther, and I would say Kenzan is not only the best of the non-localized ones I've played through, it's also one of my favourites in the series, but I don't think that one is going to come out. So let me discuss why, and I hope I haven't just triggered the end of this demo. First of all, before I get onto the big, like, juicy Epstein-themed elephant in the room, you know, the content that Sega might be uncomfortable with. Let's talk about some other reasons. People look at Yakuza Kenzan and probably assume, well, it's Yakuza 3, but set in the 16th century. And it's not. It's very much a between eras game. A lot of stuff from Yakuza 2 is still there. Like, for example, bumping into fire last, you'll often load into just a sort of made-up area. Oh, by the way, did I mention besides running away from people, this is something you didn't have in Yakuza 0? This wasn't 5, there's also stealth stuff, like you being able to hold in barrels. Yeah, Yakuza Kenzan is definitely a sort of a game of the Yakuza 2 and 1 era as much as it is for the eras after that, with a lot of missables. Like, as the story moves forward, a lot of side quests are tied to certain points in the plot, and if you miss them, you ain't gonna do them. You know, you can miss out on whole, like, cinematics and moves and stuff if you don't find the right side quests before you move forward in the story. So that, I think all of that, there's also a lot of stuff which brought for the first time into the series. Like, I think of Yakuza 3 as this big step forward, but Yakuza Kenzan did a lot also. There's a lot of cool stuff. Like, one thing which I will say is it introduced the trend of the Japanese versions having pretty shitty box art, because it was when they started using, like, big name actors and having them actually model the characters after those actors. So you got all the Japanese boxers suddenly started just being all the faces of actors on the screen. But yeah, that's why that's one of the reasons I don't think, the fact that it is kind of more dated than say you might think of, like something like Yakuza 0, which may feel dated for people who sort of got into games on like the late PS3 era or something, but you know, whatever, I'm not talking about you Angry Joes or whatever. But Yakuza Kenzan, the other big thing which people bring up, and this is the big one, is the plot. Kenzan's plot deals pretty heavily with child prostitution, and when I say pretty heavily, I don't mean in that it's not about that, but it's always there in the background. A large part of the plot resolves around the main character wanting to basically buy his wife out of prostitution. Well, it's not his wife; it's his wife's sister, who also sort of becomes his wife towards the end. So there we go. But it's also got yeah, like I said, it's sort of like young girls, fathers killed during the Sengoku era wars, being sold into prostitution. That's kind of a big part of the plot, and it's kind of just there in the background. Like, the one character who does actually express interest in, like, fucking 8-year-olds or something is a pretty clear villain. So it's not like it's this isn't some, like, lolly fan service thing. This is part of a plot, and it's, it's treated... It's not treated as good, but it's also not treated with sort of inherent horror you would kind of expect any modern title to treat it, particularly from like a Western studio. It's just kind of there. Like the fact that the main character regularly works with a madam of one of these brothels is probably something which would just make Sega very uncomfortable. So yes, I think that is an issue. I don't think this would strictly be that Sony wouldn't allow it or that Western rating systems wouldn't. I think what Sony is uncomfortable with is pretty much consistently like lolly stuff. Like I look into what is clearly specifically banned on Sony systems versus say PC, and it is pretty consistently, well, ignoring the stuff it's banned on all consoles, which is, stuff like Raid Play or Ranch or whatever. I mean, Ranch is actually good. Go ahead, Nintendo, put that on my Switch, I'll buy it. But, yeah, I think what Sony don't like is kind of actual lolly fan service, like your like whatever brawler where you play as like 15-year-old girls and then you can grope them in VR or whatever the fuck. Like that's the things I think that get them in trouble. I can't. They wouldn't have issues with Kenzan, but I find it far more dubious that they would. But I think Sega itself would be just uncomfortable with it because Sega is like. I've complained before about the newer localizations, and oh shit, I'm gonna have to yeah, I don't know if that just cut there because this is Japanese, so that means when I run into a cutscene, it just stops airing to stop me spoiling the story, which and also to make people buy the fucking game. So they have a lot of you run into a scene and it just goes, you can't record while I'm here. So I guess that's kind of it for me. I've gone over the basics of why I think Kenzan probably won't be released, and that's mostly the dated nature of the game, which is just the fact that no, this isn't like the Yakuza 3 HD, which is dated in its ways, but not in the same way Kenzan is. But it's also partly the in-game content, which, like I've said, isn't because it's like you're not fucking dating hostesses who are 12 or anything in that game, but the fact that there is that element in the background, and it's not in it while it's not like it's not something like where you have to do your kill anime lolly kind of defense mindfuckery to defend it and say it's actually critical of it. Like it's very clearly not something. Kenzan is very clearly not a game about banging lollies for pin-ups. It's a game where you play as a guy who sometimes works for a brothel madam who employs underage girls, and it's mildly uncomfortable but also not treated as sort of this shocking factor. So that's my take on it. I'm like, it's probably not coming. They're probably Sega itself, not Western rating systems or Sony, probably would be uncomfortable with that aspect, just because I can just see someone like showing a scene and saying like this is what this is, and it's yeah, it sort of sucks, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, wow, I think fan translators will get there eventually. I played through it with a perfectly good translation, which translates the whole main story, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the future emulators get there. So that's your hope to play it. I don't really particularly want a remake anyway. I don't see why there's this obsession with remakes with games. Like there's nothing against them inherently. I just think the best remakes are the least faithful because those are the ones where it might as well be a completely new game, which is I'm fine with that being a remake as opposed to the let's just what they would probably do with Kenzan, which is let's make it look modern, take the story, and then remove some bits which make people uncomfortable, which is just like, well, I'd sooner you just make a new game. So there we go. That's my take.